encouraged that there was such a terrific turnout today to say this is an important issue and these are our neighbors, and we want everyone to be respected. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I will be departing shortly for another meeting that I have to go to tonight. So I'm sorry I will miss the first part of this meeting. The last thing I wanted to say is about the community band. I believe that the city manager and I have worked out a scenario where on Monday nights, Hefner can be opened by a council person in order for the community band to continue their practices. I'm comfortable with that, and I think that that it's incumbent on this council to move as expeditiously as possible to get a swipe card system on Hefner so that we can make sure the public has access and the buildings do stay secure, which I know is the city manager's goal.
Just to follow up on one thing that Joy noted, I did make it to the meeting with the Smart Growth Group, and it was a very amicable meeting, and there was some discussion about alternative plans, potential alternative plans for the metro site, and they asked some good questions, and they were given a lot of information, and it did seem to be a very productive meeting. I think Terry had his hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. I was just curious whether we do still have a discussion of the access to Hefner Park on the agenda.
I believe that we do. I don't recall having taken it off.
Okay. Yes, I think that's later this month. Thank you. And then the other thing I noticed in reading last week, Mr. Bates, David Bates was here, and we had received a copy from City Manager Matthews of a response to some information that Mr. Bates had asked regarding our police department. And I noticed in there that we do pay quite a bit of overtime for police officers. Knowing that our officers work 12-hour shifts on a regular basis, I'm looking forward to getting information on how many hours per day our officers do work when they receive that overtime, and how many hours per week that officers typically work. Because I'm concerned that I'm concerned already with 12-hour days for a job such as a police officer is. When they have to be alert and aware, I think 12-hour days is already excessive, and to think that some of them might be working more than 12 hours a day or more than 40 hours in a week is a concern. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to let Council and other folks know that the presentation that was made here a couple of weeks ago by the ICG developers of the proposed project in Old Town, they expressed a time frame for when they thought they were going to file their plans with Park and Planning. They expressed a 30 to 60-day time frame, and I just want to let everybody know that that time frame is going to be a little longer than that, because Park and Planning said that they would like to have them back for a second preliminary consultation. So any time frame that we took away from that presentation, add to it.
I also wanted to announce that Councilmember Barry won't be with us this evening. He is traveling out of the country and won't be able to make the meeting. All right. There are no additional agenda items. The minutes in front of us are the minutes from March the 20th. Would someone like to move adoption of those minutes?
Move adoption.
Would someone like to second that? Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any comments? All right. All those in favor of adopting the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes are adopted. The next item on the agenda is public comment period. This is the time set aside for comments that are not on our items that are not on our regular meeting agenda. If you have comments on items that are on the regular meeting agenda, we would ask that you wait until we get to those items. This would be the appropriate time for comments on items on our work session agenda as well as items on other topics. And would ask that when you come to the podium, you identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes, and there's a little light on the podium that will let you know when your 3 minutes are up.
Okay.
Pat, yeah, move back, there you go. It's not centered today, it's over to the side. You're fine where you are, there you go.
My name's Pat Lovelace, live at 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland. And I got a couple of questions. One is, I was going to volunteer for a committee, a healthcare advisory committee I was hearing that the city was going to put together. Because I think, that the city needs, to be aware of, a lot of needs in our community, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, in health care among the elderly, in our low income, and probably in all our incomes in this city. And since we're going to put our budget together, I'd like to know whatever happened to the sobriety center we're going to put together, for alcohol and substance abuse, since our police officers are always dumping our alcoholics, addicts, mentally ill off in our emergency room and just and letting them clog up our system there. Because when I was in the emergency room with my back, they must have brought in, I don't know how many people. The main problem was they had too much to drink. And it takes away from our city services for people with heart attacks, people with medical and surgical needs and injuries. And we need to have something like a sobriety center with situations like that can be dealt with. And I think, if we had something set aside in our budget so we could deal with our mentally ill and our physically and elderly and other health care, we wouldn't have to have so much problem with uncontrolled mental illness and substance abuse, because the gangs are going to prey on the mentally ill and give them something that makes them feel good for the moment. The crack man's out there going to take advantage of it. It's going to cost us 20 times more in the long run. And I think it would be great if we could have something in our budget set aside and have our city council, our city government, governing our people. That's what government is supposed to be. It's supposed to be helping all our people, not just the higher echelons as well as the low echelons. It's supposed to help all of us. Health care, mentally ill, physically ill, elderly, everybody should be benefiting from our budget, and I think we should do that. Thanks for letting me share.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Actually, the city has advocated for the county putting in a sobering center, probably located somewhere in the Tacoma-Langley area, because there's a lot of problems in that area. And when I testified before the county council this past week, I said that the city was behind that sobering center. Councilmember Leventhal said that he was very supportive of it, and he would let us know when we could come forward and support that idea before the county council. So it does look like he's very interested in it and is going to advocate it before the county council.
That's great. But as a city council and as a city, we can't just have our county take everything over. We can't just expect our county to do everything for us. We as a city have to stand up and start doing something for ourselves and set some part of our budget besides the situations like this. That would be something I would love to see happen.
Well, I think the city does a fair amount, and I think this is something that ought to be the county's responsibility. And certainly it would benefit the entire community, including the community outside of the city. Yep. So I appreciate your support for that.
Yeah, but maybe it should be both city and council and state. So we got to do something.
Mayor Porter, Mr. Lovelace also mentioned the health care committee. Did you want to give the community an update on that?
I understand that we have gotten some applications for the health care committee. And,
we should still have that committee for our cities.
Oh yeah, we are planning to have it. And there's also a study of healthcare needs in the county that the county is undertaking, and I foresee our committee working very closely with that county group.
I do.
And we would also very much like to get a couple members of our community on that county group working group also.
Yes, I'd like to see that too, but I think the city should have a committee. We could maybe work on some things that maybe the city is unique to our city.
Yeah, we are planning to have our own group also.
That would be great. We need to have that. Thank you very much for letting me share.
Sure.
Yep. All right.
Is there anyone else? Yeah.
How do you do? I'm John Verde. I live on Allegheny Avenue, and here this evening representing the Tacoma Park Community Band. I understand you'll take the issues of Hefner Hall up on the 24th, and we'd like to help with that and participate in any way that could be helpful. Just to orient you, the community band is about 35 members, and we're a concert band, wind instruments, and we've been rehearsing for the 8 years that I've been participating at Hefner Hall on Mondays, and it's a fabulous facility for us. Not only does it accommodate 35 folks making a bit of noise, but it also offers us the privacy that is really helpful when you're struggling with your art. And and I understand folks have been very helpful, and understand that it's in the works to include us, and we appreciate that. And we'll participate on the 24th in any way that you think would be helpful. If we can offer something in advance, or show up, or looking for a little guidance in what you might need from us, and I can communicate with City Manager Matthews, but shoot an email, and we've actually talked a little bit.
That would be helpful to sort of keep in touch with the city manager. I'm not sure what form that discussion is going to take at this point, but you know, if you have additional things you'd like us to take a look at, that would be the helpful thing to do.
Super, thanks. And we are making arrangements for ourselves now until after that. We have a performance on the 23rd, and we have a set rehearsal space for this evening, and are not certain about the rest of the time beforehand. And folks have offered to open it up for us, so we'll continue to ask for that help, and be back on the 24th.
Okay.
And I understand that Tacoma Park Community Band is not a known entity. If I could answer any questions about that briefly here, I'd be happy to. If you,
I think you're pretty well known. I mean, most people have heard you at the 4th of July and at a number of occasions that you've played for us, and most of the Martin Luther King Day recently.
Tacoma Towers, and then, you know, down at St. Elizabeth's and elsewhere in the city. Okay, very good. Thanks. We'll see you.
Well, thank you.
We can be more helpful.
John, I would just caution you that your practices may not be as private as you think they are. The neighbors near Hefner Park have assured me that you're not unknown in that neighborhood.
We don't hear any applause. I'm not sure that could possibly be possible. But thanks. We'll keep it in mind.
Is anyone else?
I'm Lorraine Pearsall of Historic Tacoma, and I am just here to announce that the 33rd Annual House and Garden Tour will be Sunday, May 7th from 1 to 5. It's called The Art of Living. We will have many artistic homes on the tour. We will have 12 homes, many gardens, and one church. Tickets are now available at American Craft, Mark's Kitchen, Now and Then, and the Food Co-op. They are $15 in advance to the community and $20 on the day of the tour. On the day of the tour, tickets and brochures will be available at the farmers market, where we will be set up, because the tour will begin near there. It is focused on willow and tulip. And finally, I just want to say that we really appreciate the support of the community on this tour. It is our biggest fundraiser. And as many of you know, we are in search of a building, to buy a building for community archive space. So this really matters to us. So thank you in advance.
Well, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kim Brooks. I live on Tulip Avenue between Cedar and Maple, and I'm just calling here actually to give the Council a brief update on a project that I suspect you've heard a bit about, which is now called the Safe Tacoma Project, which you all may also hear as a model on the C-Safe project over in Langley Park. The group of people who've been working on it are from both sides of the border, so to speak. You have members of the D.C. Tacoma community as well as the Maryland Tacoma community. And just briefly, they've met recently and kind of drafted a mission statement as well as some goals for the project, which I'm happy to let you know of now if you think that would be helpful. The mission, which the group has settled on, is that the Safe Tacoma Crime Prevention Initiative seeks to promote sustained efforts by the District of Columbia, the City of Tacoma Park, other governmental entities, businesses, and communities that will lead to the highest level of public safety in the Old Tacoma area. Goals of the program, which have been drafted, include that the Safe Tacoma program seeks to prevent crime and reduce the fear of crime, to promote safe and aware communities, and to improve communications and foster collaboration among public agencies and neighborhoods. The group's also currently working on identifying partners they'd like to be working with and an outreach plan. The next meeting's the end of the month, and afterwards I'll be back with further update.
Well, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Gerald Younger. I'm one of the co-conductors of the Tacoma Park Community Band. I just have a brief statement.
Okay.
As John has indicated, the unavailability of the Hefner Center has been somewhat, well, quite disruptive. And as a community band, one of the very basic necessities of a group, a survival of the group, is a stable place to rehearse. I understand that the council is working the issue. We appreciate it. But there's just one question. The time between now and the time when we can work out the arrangement, the permanent arrangement, how will we, can we gain access to Hefner Center in the interim?
I think, Barb, did you agree that a council member can open the facility for them?
Yes, that would be fine. As I've indicated to the council, from a, and it's nothing related to the community band, but from a kind of security of assets, saying that the key needs to remain in the custody of someone who's affiliated with the city, not someone outside the structure. Certainly, I would have no discomfort with having a council member, if you wish to be able to open the building the night of the council meeting. Obviously, that may conflict with your attendance here. And then basically, we'd need to have the facility locked up and the key returned.
I don't agree with the policy, but we're going to discuss the policy on April 24th. And in the interim, I'd be glad to serve as the official key holder, if you would like.
Okay, we'll definitely have someone prior to the meeting. You normally start at 7:30.
That's correct.
Okay, so we can definitely have someone there at least by 7:15, 7:10, whatever would accommodate you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Catherine Tunis. I'm here as chair of the Tacoma Park Committee on the Environment. And as the council is starting their budget discussions, I wanted to make a request, if I could. When we had our discussions last year about making the Committee on the Environment a legislative committee, we talked about having a separate budget for the committee, and we actually talked about an amount, and we had that in the draft ordinance all the way up to the point where the council was voting on it. And at that point in time, the city manager suggested that it wasn't really appropriate to have an amount in the law itself, but that it would be set aside in the city budget for us. When we haven't had the expenses that we thought we were going to have this year, but when we did have some recently, we asked about what would be the procedures for accessing our budget. We learned that, indeed, the money was not set aside. We haven't had a problem. The city manager has been able to accommodate us so far in terms of our small requests in the city manager's discretionary fund, but we would like to make a request to council that they set those amount of funds aside for us in the city budget so that we can make sure that we will have them for the activities that we want. I think that we will have at least one committee member who would like to attend the ICLEI conference, which I believe is going to be in July, and that may be our major expenditure for the year. We may have other expenditures. We're having a workshop soon. We may repeat that workshop in the next fiscal year, and other kinds of things. I also wanted to mention that when we talked about having the committee as an official committee last year, council asked us that they wanted to know what we were doing, what we were working on. And I realized that we haven't had a chance to talk to you guys just generally about what's going on. And I mean, I'd be happy to run down a laundry list tonight, but if you would like to schedule a work session for us to just chat sometime, I think we'd be happy to come in and do that. Okay. You may have seen that we've had a number of articles in the newsletter recent months. We've been working on the Mercury Switch legislation with the legislature. We're planning a rain barrel workshop in early May. Unfortunately, it's going to conflict with the house tour. It's going to be on May 7th at 1 o'clock at Hefner Park. There will be a fee for that, but only for materials, and people can call Public Works if they'd like to register for that. I think there's going to be a lot of demand for it. And lastly, I have one bit of bad news because Jack Lipschultz is one of our new members, has had some family issues in recent months and is also expecting a child. And so he is needing to resign from the committee. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was quite resolute. So we're going to be very sorry to see him go. But he has written an article for the newsletter that will appear in coming months.
Okay, good, thank you. You know?
Lino Aldriguez, 7213 Central Avenue. Call me paranoid, but I've been putting together some, piecing together some facts that some of you up there already know. But it strikes me that they ought to be, that some may be correct and some may not be correct, but that I would hope that by putting them out in the public, that it would encourage further fact-finding on the city's part to make a determination if they're correct or not. Looking at the one of the major issues in Tacoma Park, of course, we look at the hospital and the hospital's move and the relationship between the hospital and the college at this point. Looking at the players, Harold Lee is president of, and the Interlocks. Harold Lee is president of Columbia Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, which covers a 5-state area in the Middle Atlantic region of the U.S., and chairs the Board of Trustees for Adventist Healthcare, and also chairs the Board of Trustees for Columbia Union College. William Robertson is the secretary of the Adventist Healthcare Board of Trustees, chairs the Board of Trustees of Washington Adventist Hospital, and is a member of the Board of Trustees of Columbia Union College. Randall Wisby serves as secretary of the Columbia Union College Board of Trustees, and just recently was added to the Board of Trustees of Washington Adventist Hospital. There is some sense in terms of talking to people that the decision to move the college was one that
You mean the hospital?
the hospital, rather, thank you, was, and maybe the college. The hospital was one that was presented to the Board of Trustees at the time that they were asked to vote on it, rather than as part of a deliberative process that went on. When Lee and Robertson made that announcement and requested the support, again, if this is correct, then that vote took place. Regarding Columbia Union College, at the urging of Lee, Board Chair Lee, a commission was established that to review possible changes in the configuration of the college that could address its financial, continuing financial issues. And one of the solutions put forward was to, as I understand it, was to convert the college to a medical arts college. Now, what that would do would move the college into the control of Adventist health systems as opposed to the current situation. The people who sit on the committee that I just described, if I'm correct, are Dr. Ilya Simmons as chair, who's the vice president of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, Harriet Canosa of Columbia Union Education, Columbia Union Education staff, Joseph Garabathan, former CUC academic dean, James Lee, CFO, Adventist Healthcare, Ed Matt Schneider, Columbia Union Assistant to the President, Joanna Soliday, Consultant Performa, Don Parsley, former CFO of Loma Linda University and CUC Board of Trustees members, Dean Bullard, Phyllis Edmonds, and Neville Harcum, Secretary of Columbia Union Conferences of SDAs, and CUC. My understanding is that that the CUC President and the CFO and current academic dean are not included in that committee, although they are depicted as having some interest in being there. At the last commission meeting, there was a discussion of the valuation of the land on which the college sits, and having that turned over to the hospital in what would then become an asset of the hospital. The hospital's land was allegedly appraised at $20 million, and the college land was estimated to be worth $80 million. And so there's certainly a lot more, and I would simply say that there is a CUC constituency meeting that takes place on May 19th, and if indeed there is, that what I am saying is not filled with paranoia and I should not be institutionalized, then there may well be, or it would be a logical place for there to be a vote relating to the college at that point. And prior to that, there would most likely be a vote of the college's Board of Trustees. So I simply raise that, and I would suggest to you that that if there's any sense that any of this might be worth pursuing, that North American President Don Schneider or World Church President Jan Paulson might be people for you to begin to meet with and to begin to see whether any of this is real. I would be ashamed to lose both institutions and to have both these moves tied together.
I actually had heard the same rumor, and I spoke to Randall Wisby, who is the president of Columbia Union College, and his response to me was that there was a large sort of reassessment of what the college's, position was, which he said that they do periodically, and that one of the options being listed on that position would be to move the college. But in his view, that had very little likelihood of getting the support of the board.
Well, to my mind, that's a good thing to have in the public record, that you were told that by someone of Wisby's stature within the institution, and the more people that are on the record saying that, the more solid I believe that will be. And I would encourage you guys to take that information, whatever of it is real, and make that as public as you possibly can. That would be a terrible move in this city.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right, not seeing anyone else, we will move on to the city manager's report.
Just a few items. Just as a reminder to everyone that the lobby outside this chamber, as well as the Grant Avenue entrance to the building, will be closed as of tomorrow to allow TRG Construction, which is the contractor for the second phase, to basically do some work in the lobby area. We expect this work to take approximately 3 weeks. So anyone coming to the building, in all likelihood, would probably want to park on the Maple Avenue side in front of the police department. Obviously, the elevator will be out of service during this time period. Our intention is for anyone who needs services during the day, who maybe has some mobility issues, we will just basically bring the service to you in the public safety lobby. I would also mention that because of the construction and this chamber being off limits, a number of city meetings will basically be relocated during the next 3 weeks. The city council meetings during that time period will be held at Tacoma Park Middle School. A number of the other city meetings, including board and commission meetings, will be held in a variety of locations. Some will be held at Hefner. Some will be held in the Computer Learning Center. Please keep an eye on the city's website in terms of the latest information on where meetings will be held, or certainly feel free to call the city clerk's office at 301-891-7267. Just a few other items not related to the community center project. In regard to Ms. Tunis's question about funding for the Committee on the Environment, I will be presenting my proposed budget for FY07 in just a few minutes. There is $3,500, Catherine, basically included in my proposed budget. The last item I had has to do with the Historic Tacoma Garden Tour that Ms. Pearsall had brought up earlier. She and I spoke, I believe it was last Thursday. And she has asked whether the city would be willing to serve as a sponsor of Historic Tacoma's garden tour. The council can either have some discussion about that this evening, or I can certainly put it under my report next week, whatever the council's pleasure is. I believe, Ms. Pearsall, the request was $2,500. Is that correct?
You're talking about out of this year's budget?
That's correct. My understanding is the city would be listed as a sponsor on any type of promotional materials or publicity associated with the garden tour.
I think it would probably be more appropriate to do it at a point where we had been able to advertise in advance, and we can try and get it on the council discussion as soon as possible.
Ms. Pearsall, what is the deadline in terms of your needing a decision?
Well, things are ongoing right now, Kathy, where we can actually put the city sponsorship is really on the tour brochures, which I think, are, we print up about 800 of them, and people keep them, and that is one of the major places where we put, sponsorships right on there. And we do, we have really not a lot of space for advertising. We do little line items in the post.
Is there a timeline on that?
Well, it's happening. It's all happening now. So that's all I can say. We haven't printed up the brochures yet, but
could we, if we did it next Monday, could we? Would that be enough time?
Yeah. Okay. You could do that.
Okay. That concludes my report, unless the council has any questions.
I think Terry and then Colleen.
Just real quick, my off-hours access to the building is, to the third floor is through the swipe card in the old lobby, and I just wonder if there are going to be alternate means to gain entrance while that lobby is closed.
Quite honestly, that's a good question, Councilmember Siemens. We hadn't thought about that. The swipe cards obviously will not work on the Grand Avenue side, since that will be a construction zone. Let us give that some thought. I forgot that you all were here outside of normal business hours picking up your packets and things. You should be able just to enter, though,
you can enter the
for the
police
most
lobby,
part.
but the door is locked. You can't go up the stairs.
You can't go up to the first floor, or the second
Up to
floor.
the floor. Is the purpose normally to pick up your council packet or things, or your mail?
Right.
One option may be just for us to gather up your mail and your council packet and just leave it in dispatch. If it would be inconvenient to come during any of the weekend hours when the building is open.
I appreciate that.
Okay, yeah, if anyone does need us to make that accommodation, if you could please just let us know. Thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember Siemens.
Colleen?
I don't have a swipe card. It's all right, I don't need one.
We'll get you one when the security system's in.
They'll take a swipe at you.
That's right. My question is about the disabled access. How long is the disabled access going to be restricted?
It will probably be for the period of construction, because they're basically doing flooring work as well as electrical work in the ceiling of the lobby area. No, probably no more than 3 weeks. We're hoping it may be less.
Okay. Is there disabled parking on the first level?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But the access for the disabled parking is at the Grand Avenue entrance. It's going to be closed.
No, there's also
There's 2 handicap spots down on the
In front of the public safety lobby.
right next to the door.
But there's no means for those people to get upstairs, and that's only access for the police
But
department.
We're going to deliver the service to the lobby.
Okay. not sure which services that is.
If anyone basically needs to make a payment, for instance, at finance, we will actually send an employee down to the lobby, pick up the payment, run back up to finance, process everything, bring the receipt back down. If it's a matter of getting some assistance, for instance, if you're a tenant, we will actually have the employee from housing come down to the police lobby area and basically go into one of the adjacent rooms and provide service in that location.
Okay, I was more concerned about residents who were participating in the senior programs, which are on the second floor, middle floor, whatever we call that. I think it's the second floor.
Yes, and basically, there is some access. A lot of the senior programs are taking place in the senior room, which is accessible, and there's parking immediately behind that building, in the rear parking lot.
Okay, but the ones that are in the art room will have to, they'll have to find other ways.
You can access the second floor during the day by coming through
across the bridge.
The Learning Center, yeah.
The other option, Councilmember Siemens, which is, if need be, if we had to, obviously, there is access through the police department if an elevator access absolutely had to be obtained. Obviously, what we're trying to do is, since that is a secured law enforcement area, is just provide service, but certainly we'll make whatever accommodation we need to provide service.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is that it for your? Okay. We're going to move on to the rest of our agenda. The first thing we have on our agenda this evening is a briefing. Buddy Daniels wanted to brief us on a special outreach campaign, which he'd like to let residents of the city know about, that's available to people through their neighborhood associations or other kinds of groups. Wherever you're comfortable, Buddy.
I've got more stuff. First of all, thank you very much. I'm Buddy Daniels, 19 Sherman Avenue, and I'm a member of the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee and the Emergency Preparedness Committee. Thank you for your time tonight, and I'll try to be brief. I wanted to discuss with you the idea of an emergency preparedness campaign in Tacoma Park. Specifically, each individual apartment and/or household having a home disaster or emergency supply kit on hand and in-house. The concept was not my original idea. It came from a combination of sources. At the March 22nd Public Safety Contacts meeting, Stacy Baker, co-chair of the Emergency Preparedness Committee, suggested we should focus on the COG goal of 50% of the households in the Washington metropolitan area having a home disaster emergency supply kit on hand and ready for use. Stacy's message was keep it simple. Focus on one theme for Tacoma Park. Later that evening, I was discussing emergency preparedness education in general with Mayor Porter and Ward 2 Council Member Clay. They felt an emergency preparedness education program could be conducted like a political campaign, and they were correct. What if we combine both ideas? Focus on one theme, the distribution of home disaster emergency supply kit, educational materials, verbal and written, also include information on the Roam Alert System and CERT training, conduct this program like a political campaign, something I'm familiar with and something you're familiar with. Well, in the last 2 weeks, I have formed an emergency preparedness outreach committee focusing on these issues. The Public Citizen Safety Advisory Committee will coordinate the campaign, but I see the outreach committee as a liaison between the Public Safety Committee, Volunteer Fire Department, the Emergency Preparedness Committee, and Tacoma Park City Government. At this point in time, there are 8 volunteers on the Outreach Committee, 3 from the Public Safety Committee, 3 from the Emergency Preparedness Committee, and 2 from the Volunteer Fire Department. Everyone I've spoken with seems very enthusiastic about the Outreach Committee, so we hope to recruit more members in the near future, very near future. One of the major tasks of the Outreach Committee would be to present a brief program to our community associations, tenant associations, and any other group we or they feel a presentation would benefit. This presentation could include pamphlets from FEMA, such as Preparing for Disaster, and I left some up there. That's a good little pamphlet. prerequisite which describes what supplies to include in your home emergency supply kit, web addresses and phone numbers for people to contact FEMA for more information if they so desire. By the way, these pamphlets are free. Second, the presentation would include a discussion on the Roam Alert system, what it is and how to sign up. Thirdly, the presentation would discuss CERT training and again how to sign up for that 20-hour course. To further publicize the Home Disaster Emergency Supply Kit campaign, we'll use already existing resources. For instance, monthly or bi-monthly articles in the Tacoma newsletter, hopefully articles in the Tacoma Voice and Tacoma Gazette, possibly spots on our cable station, email to public safety contacts and as many of the neighborhood listservs as possible. Carol Bannerman is assisting the outreach committee with the Tacoma newsletter and the email. I've spoken with Ellen Robbins, and we'll have FEMA pamphlets at our library. For now, I'll be supplying them. I literally, over the last 6 months, have been collecting different pamphlets from FEMA. But the pamphlet I like the most is the pamphlet I gave you. It's 10 pages. 10 pages. It contains a lot of information in it, and it also has the phone numbers for FEMA you can call if you wish to order the larger pamphlet, Are You Ready? I know it's 100 pages, but if you read 20 pages of it, you'll be very well prepared in most emergencies, and you can pick and choose whatever you'd like to read. Do you need to read about tsunamis around here? I don't think so, but you might find the reading, generally interesting. For tornadoes, hurricanes, thunderstorms is in here too. FEMA will mail this to each family as long as a family member calls up, and again, it's free. But reading this pamphlet will help prepare people for emergency situations. As of right now, this is definitely a work in progress, and I underlined that, but it really is gaining momentum. Andy Kellman and I were up, the president of the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee, and one of the members on the outreach committee were up at the Taste of Tacoma up at the CUC on Sunday. I handed out 150 FEMA pamphlets, so did Andy. We had a really good enthusiastic response from people. One other thing, I'm going to also contact some of the members from Victory Towers. They have basically produced their own emergency disaster pamphlets and information for exiting the towers in an orderly and safe manner. And I'd like to include one or two of those members of their committee on our committee. I'm going to approach them. They're very good and very awesome, and it's an excellent piece of work. I believe Suzanne Ludlow's mom did that, and it's a very good piece of work. But if you have any questions, please ask.
Well, I thank you for doing all that organizing work, Buddy. That's a lot of good work, and I'm sure it'll be very useful to people. And not just, in the case of a major disaster, we're approaching the summertime, and most of the summers in past years, we've had at least one thunderstorm that knocked out power for a part of the city. So these kinds of things can be useful much sooner than people think. God forbid we should have another hurricane, but that wasn't so many years ago either, and I'm sure that people's home disaster kits were very useful in that circumstance also. So, that kind of thing could come up sooner than you think. So I appreciate your doing the work. And in terms of mentioning getting things in the Gazette, I see that there may be someone who can help you with that right in the back of the room.
Sean and I had an excellent conversation up at the Taste of Tacoma. And by the way, just one other thing briefly. I consider all the council members your safety contacts, too.
So you're trying to get us to take CERT training, is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily CERT training, but hello.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned CERT training, and I know that the enrollment for the next class just opened on April 1st, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that training, because I know you've gone through it, and let people know how they can enroll.
To enroll, well, the training basically is a 20-hour course, and it takes place up at the Fire and Police Academy up in Darnestown. And Tuesday night, Thursday night, Saturday you'll meet at the Fire Academy and for classroom work. Tuesday night, Thursday night, and then Saturday you'll go out and actually participate in a number of exercises. CERT training, you learn how to, and you're trained how to assist the fire department and or police department in certain situations. You literally would be called out via email or by phone, and you would go to your rendezvous point, which our rendezvous point is the Resource Center over in Silver Spring on Wayne Avenue, and you go as a group. CERTs always go as a group unless something happens in your neighborhood and you're working alone and you try to help. But with CERT training, you learn how to take care of yourself and what not to do and how to assist and not make yourself a problem, a part of the emergency. You learn how to evaluate situations and report in to the authorities. It's a line of communication. You also, I think, and this came up in our public safety contact meetings, it's so important. What if I want to take CERT training, but because of my back injury, I'm not able to do the physical demands of CERT training? And they're not all that physical, but they can be somewhat. We discuss this, and we still say, go through the CERT training, because you can go out and educate, and that is so important. So even if you could not participate in an actual CERT disaster situation, education is important, and you still could be involved in lines of communication. What we learned about prevention, we learned about having our home safety emergency kits, we learned about how to put out very light fires, and I mean light fires. We learned how to use extinguishers. We learned that if I go into a room and look around and I don't feel it's safe to go in, we don't go in. We learned what was not safe to do, and we learned to work in teams. The biggest thing was teamwork and how to report in to your incident commander in a situation. And to get in contact, and this is off the top of my head, you'd want to call the Homeland Security, Montgomery County Homeland Security Department. It's 240-777-2200, and speak with Chief Brian Gervasi. I'm sorry, I don't have his website on me right now. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
That's very helpful.
Thank you. Sure.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Buddy, very much for pulling this together, and I'm glad you were able to give this presentation. And if anyone wants to have this presentation to their community association or their tenants association or their church group or whoever, how should they get in touch with you? How should they do that?
Right now, they can call me at 301-270-5789. It's 301-270-5789. Or they can email me at buddyd@highsurfer.net. High Surfer is spelled Hisurfer. And I am reading my emails, Bruce Williams.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, thank you very much, Buddy, and I appreciate all the work that you've done organizing this, and I think it will be extremely valuable. And again, you know, we're coming up to summertime when we could have minor emergencies coming up, so this is a good time for people to get in touch with you and to get that information.
Thank you, and I want to thank the members of the Emergency Preparedness Committee and the members of the Public Safety Committee and Volunteer Fire Department and for helping out, because this is hopefully to get a loosely knit committee up to about 15 people.
That's great.
Knock on wood. But.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you.
And if I can remind my colleagues on the council that I believe it's this month's Montgomery MML chapter meeting is at the County Operations Center with a tour.
Right. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the presentation of the city manager's proposed budget for FY07.
Yes, I'll actually be doing a brief PowerPoint presentation if I could ask the council to step down from the dais.
Okay. Maybe in the budget there's something for a better presentation system in this room?
It's in the works.
Oh, no, you can have it.
Take it. Yeah, that'd be good. Maybe sit by yourself. No offense.
It's my pleasure this evening to present my recommended budget for fiscal year '07. As I always do, I would comment that the putting together this budget is a tremendous amount of work on the part of the staff, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank not only the members of the management team, but many members of the finance department staff, as well as my own department, who were instrumental in putting this document together. As a starting off point, I just wanted to comment a little bit on the council priorities that sort of were the underpinnings of my recommended budget. Back in January, I met with the council to talk about what your priority policy areas were for calendar years 2006 and 2007. And throughout that process, we came up with basically 5 primary priorities. Those were the preservation of affordable housing in the community, the completion of the community center project, promotion of appropriate development on a citywide basis, in particular in regard to development, the redevelopment and revitalization of the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, and fairer tax duplication payments. I would note that certain items have an associated cost with them, and I'll try to comment on those as I go through this presentation. Other items, such as the fairer tax duplication payments, ultimately really become a political issue in terms of our lobbying and negotiating with Montgomery County, and perhaps some statewide legislative initiatives. Some other things that I took into account in putting together my recommended budget were these 4 items. The maintenance of adequate financial reserves. There's really 2 major things that you try to look at when you're setting up your reserve levels. One is any type of unexpected dip in revenues that you might have to withstand, and certainly just any kind of unexpected expenses that may arise. Also, the city, as the council is aware, is very dependent on property taxes. Those tend to come in a very short period of time during the fiscal year, and you have to have adequate cash on hand to get you through those time periods where you don't have revenues coming in, but you have checks going out. Some other items that I took into account included the maintenance of the city's infrastructure, our streets, our stormwater system, as well as the maintenance of the city's own vehicle and equipment fleet. And then lastly, and this probably is worded somewhat poorly, it was really no increase in the real property tax rate. We certainly didn't go into the budget with the goal of not changing it at all, but we certainly tried to see what we could do to keep that as low as possible. For those who may not be familiar with the city's budget structure, I'll just spend a few minutes talking about that. Our budget and our financial structure is based on 4 primary funds or groupings of expenses. Those would be the general fund, the stormwater management fund, the special revenue funds, and the community center fund. As I started last year, which was my first budget, the way in which this budget is presented mirrors the audit format for consistency and transparency that someone who is looking at the city's audited financial statements can track from the budget document to the city's audited statements. Just sort of an overview of all funds. Combined, all 4 funds have revenues of $18.2 million. Total expenditures are $19.3 million. Over the course of FY07, I anticipate that we will use $1.1 million in fund balance. A portion of that, approximately $400,000, actually represents, if you will, sort of a drawdown of certain reserves that have been put in place for specific purposes. Those include the equipment replacement reserve, which, as the council is aware, is where the city sets aside money every year for the planned replacement of city's equipment as well as our maintenance fleet. Additionally, the city took out a loan to make street improvements during fiscal year 2005. We did a tremendous amount of work last fiscal year, as well as during FY06. During FY07, the Public Works Director anticipates that we'll spend about $91,000 of those street loan proceeds. It's actually a little less than in prior years. We're sort of in a situation where we have some streets that we will be working on in conjunction with WSSC, and their planning process is actually lagging behind ours a little bit, which will slow some improvements down. Kind of turning to the general fund, this is really the primary fund in the city's financial structure, and it's probably what most people think of when you think about traditional governmental services. The general fund basically covers almost exclusively all operational activities of the city. It's going to include the cost of police protection, snow removal, trash pickup, and general administration. The general fund also includes certain costs that aren't associated with a particular department, and one of the primary examples of that is our liability insurance coverage and other types of insurance. Any type of debt service payments that the city has are paid through the general fund, as well as our capital outlay. An overview of the general fund, total revenues of $16.5 million, total expenditures of $17.4 million. My recommended budget does anticipate that there will be operating transfers to two funds. Those would include the Special Revenue Fund as well as the Community Center Fund. Over the course of the year, if the council accepts this budget as presented, we would be using about $1.1 million in fund balance. And as I commented on a few minutes ago, basically $400,000 of that amount would be withdrawals from the equipment replacement reserve and the expenditure of street loan proceeds. Touching on general fund revenue specifically, the major revenue sources for the city's operation are going to be taxes and utility fees, as well as intergovernmental revenues. When you have an opportunity to look more closely at the budget binder that was distributed this evening, you'll note that some other sources of operational revenues include licenses and permits, fines and forfeitures, investment earnings, and certain fees and charges. As I mentioned, total revenues for the general fund are projected to be $16.5 million. As I mentioned, the real property taxation really is the engine that drives the city financially. Based on the information we received from the state, the city's assessable base will increase by $116 million from 05 to 06, basically on July 1st dates. I have assumed a continuation of the tax rate of 63 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. Last year, the council did decrease the tax rate from 66 cents to 63 cents, and this budget is predicated on a continuation of that rate. Revenues from real property taxation are projected to be $8.1 million, and monies from real property taxation total almost 49% of our total operating revenues for the general fund. Some other things I just wanted to comment on relative to general fund revenues. We're projecting that income tax revenues will increase by about $101,000 compared to the FY06 budget. To be quite candid, it's very difficult to do projections for income taxes whenever you contact the state. They're very hesitant to give you very much information. This year we did touch base with Montgomery County and talk to the person within their governmental structure who's sort of the income tax expert to get some insight into how they are projecting income taxes for next year, and with their assistance, we developed our estimate. State police protection revenues are projected to decrease by about $38,000. One of the things I wanted to highlight this for the council was that a lot of these expenditures have been tied in recent years to the community center construction. What the state does is they come in and they audit any type of police-related expenditures, and in recent years they've not only looked at our operational expenditures, but they've allowed us to factor in construction costs related to the public safety level. Obviously that construction is now complete for the most part, and so we are expecting next year that revenues from this source will actually decline, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to explain why. Charges for service are projected to increase by a little bit under $82,000. That is mostly due to recreational program revenues and some of the enhanced programming opportunities we have as a result of the new community center. I wanted to comment on tax duplication payments, since this has obviously been a subject that there has been extensive discussion about in the community in the past year or so. Total payments from tax duplication are projected to be $3 million. That equates to about 18.2% of total operating revenues in the general fund, and it's an increase of just under $29,000 compared to the FY06 budget. One thing I did want to highlight for the council is when you have a chance to look at the budget document is you will note that there is no change in the payment for police services. And I think I had mentioned this during the council priority session back in either January or March. The information included in my recommended budget reflects the amounts that are included in the county executive's proposed budget. Based on the information received from the county's executive's office, what they have indicated is that if the formula that was mutually agreed upon by the city and the county were followed to the T, if you will, it would actually result in a decrease in the city's tax duplication payment for police services. We have requested some backup data. We have received a portion of that, and based on the staff's initial analysis, it does appear that we would actually see a decrease, primarily because of the average salaries that the county is paying. If you have any type of significant turnover and you have new hires that are coming in who are making less money, that will affect basically the average salary that is used in the formula. It's my understanding from Suzanne Ludlow, who obviously has been with the city much longer than I have been, that this actually did occur several years ago, where the city actually experienced a decrease in its payment. We are requesting some additional data from the county. We want to do some further exploration of this issue. But on the surface, at least, it appears what we have been told is, in fact, the case. The county executive's office has indicated that they put in the higher amount essentially to hold Tacoma Park harmless. And Suzanne Ludlow has expressed some concern about how this increase, if you will, included in the county executive's budget compared to the formula basis may be viewed by some of the county committees reviewing it. So I think that's certainly something that we'll have to watch very closely. Obviously, the long-term issue that we need to deal with is negotiating a much more fair payment from the county, not only for police services, but for all other types of services in accordance with the TASD report. I would mention that we were successful in negotiating a higher payment for crossing guards, as the council may recall. I guess it was early this fiscal year, the council authorized the hiring of an additional crossing guard to be located at the post at Cedar in Philadelphia. I shared some of the information compiled by the police department with the county executive's office and made the case that if the county were providing this service, that they would also put a guard there based on the crossings at that location. And the county did increase our payments for crossing guards for next year. Turning to general fund expenditures, the largest departments, as the council is aware, are police and public works. Combined, those two departments' proposed budgets total $8.5 million, which represents just under 49% of total general fund expenditures. My recommended budget does include certain new positions, some of which the council has discussed before and some of which you have not. The additional code enforcement officer was tied specifically to the redevelopment of the New Hampshire Avenue corridor and a need for much more intensive code enforcement in that area of the city. Related to some of the development initiatives that the council would like to undertake, both on a citywide basis as well as the New Hampshire Avenue corridor. The Housing and Community Development Department budget does include an additional planning intern to help with some of the data compilation related to those efforts. And when you have an opportunity to review the budget, you'll also note that there are two new part-time positions reflected in the police department, one dealing with accreditation and one dealing with evidence management. Some other things I wanted to highlight relative to general fund expenditures. As we discussed during the priority sessions earlier this year, there are a number of very major development issues currently being discussed in the city, including the proposed development at the Tacoma Metro site, some discussion about a major development in the Old Town area, the proposed relocation of Washington Adventist Hospital, and I'm sure a variety of other issues that may come up during FY07. My recommended budget does include $100,000 for specialized planning consulting services, yet to be determined, but my hope was that we would have some funding in the budget to hire consultants as needed to assist us in dealing with those specific development issues. My recommended budget does include the continuation of certain affordable housing programs that are already in place in the city. These would include the tenant capacity building program as well as the housing tax credit program. I also wanted to highlight the contribution to the equipment replacement reserve. Over the course of this fiscal year, the staff and I undertook a review of the city's capital improvement program, and one of the things we noted is that there were a number of items that met the threshold for the city's CIP, which is basically $5,000, and certain other criteria that for whatever reason have not been included in the CIP and the equipment replacement reserve in the past. Because of the inclusion of those items, I am recommending that the equipment replacement reserve contribution be increased during FY07, and that amount is $300,000. Some other items that the council may be interested in relative to general fund expenditures. We've had some discussion most recently because some of the traffic calming measures that have been requested, I think along Allegheny and another street in the city, about neighborhood traffic studies. And the council had expressed a desire to include some funding to hire a traffic consultant to perhaps look at other types of traffic calming measures rather than just putting speed bumps in. My recommended budget does include $25,000 for that purpose. Another item that may be of interest includes is $20,000 for emergency preparedness supplies. I think this came out of some of staff's discussions with the Emergency Preparedness Committee. And basically, if you had employees who needed to be on site for an extended period of time due to some type of emergency, it would be cots, blankets, food, things of that nature. And this would be included in the non-departmental budget. Turning to capital outlay, just a few items of note. The council previously authorized the staff to have some discussions with Local 400, the police union, about expanding the city's police take-home car program. And as you have an opportunity to review the CIP, you'll note that there are increasing amounts in the CIP for expanding the program. This was an issue that the chief felt strongly about in terms of the city's ability to attract new police officers and to retain them. So from our standpoint, it is a matter of competitiveness and recruitment. I believe in FY07, Mr. Hobbs can correct me if I'm wrong, it's approximately $120,000 or somewhere in that neighborhood for expanding the program, and that amount would increase in subsequent years should the council choose to accept that recommendation. The next item is a new piece of equipment for the Recreation Department. We had some discussion about this during the preparation of the FY06 budget, and due to funding concerns, the council did not choose to move forward at that time. The Recreation Director has for some time felt that one of the things that limits her ability to offer certain programs is the lack of an accessible bus. What she has recommended after doing some considerable research is a very small bus, so it's not a huge piece of equipment, that would basically seat about 15 persons or 12 individuals and 2 wheelchairs. It would have a lift, and she feels this would offer a lot of programming opportunities, not only for those who have mobility problems or seniors, but just generally in terms of her department's ability to offer services to more youth in the community. Those type of buses do not come cheap. The estimated cost for this piece of equipment is about $53,000. The last item I just wanted to comment on relative to capital has to do with pedestrian safety funding. During the FY06 budget, I had included about $25,000 for various pedestrian safety initiatives to be determined as the fiscal year kind of unfolded. We've had some specific discussion in recent months about certain improvements to Glenside and Wildwood, which would cost about $25,000. And the remaining $20,000 could be allocated as the council chose, and perhaps with some input from the Safe Roadways Committee. Kind of turning to the Stormwater Management Fund, and we've also had some extensive discussion of stormwater management in recent months as well. As the council is aware, the city is responsible for the construction and maintenance and repair of the stormwater system within Tacoma Park. The Stormwater Management Fund was created, I believe, in the late 1990s to account for revenue and expenditure activity related to stormwater management. Just a brief overview. Total revenues for FY07 are projected to be $376,500. With the exception of about $1,500, all of that funding is coming through fees paid by individual property owners in Tacoma Park. Back in February, we had some fairly extensive discussions about the stormwater base rate, and essentially the rate that has been in effect, $28.68, has been in effect almost from the program's inception. It went into effect in the late 1990s and has not been changed since that time. As we talked about in February, some of our maintenance costs have increased threefold since the stormwater management program went into effect in the 1990s. There's been a number of capital projects that we've been unable to address or to implement because of funding constraints. And back in February, the council did endorse a new stormwater base rate of $48. I would comment that that rate would not go into effect until fiscal year 07. The council adopts the stormwater base rate as well as the stormwater budget to go into effect in July 1st. Because it is the primary funding source for the Stormwater Management Fund, most of the funds are coming in either the mid to latter part of the fiscal year. So one of the things we do have to watch fairly closely with the Stormwater Management Fund is sort of the ebb and flow, if you will, of the cash. In talking to the Public Works Director, what we would probably do is do some of the design and planning for some of the capital projects in the first half of FY07, and then actually construct some of the capital projects in the latter part of the year after the billing goes out and the monies come in. In terms of total expenditures for stormwater management, the FY07 budget reflects expenditures of just about $349,000. Of that amount, about 71% is dedicated to maintenance and operation of the system, with the remainder, just under 29%, devoted to capital outlay and construction projects. The special revenue funds is actually comprised of several different funds. It includes community development block grant revenues, program open space, and a variety of other grant programs. The special revenue funds basically account for expenditure activity related to grant monies that are earmarked for certain purposes. And it's the mechanism that the city uses to make sure that we're compliant with the various grant program requirements. Just in brief, total revenues for the special revenue funds is just over $890,000. Total expenditures are $895,000 approximately. Certain of the grants, particularly some of either the program open space grants or some of the Bureau of Justice assistant grants for the police department, do have matching requirements by the city. Typically, that match is funded through an operating transfer from the general fund, and for FY07, that would be approximately $4,600. Turning to the Community Center Fund, this fund was established in fiscal year '03 and basically accounts for revenue and expenditure activity attributable to the community center construction. Obviously, the community center project actually was being discussed and funds were being expended prior to fiscal year '03. In the prior years, activity was tracked through the special revenue funds. Total revenues or operating transfers for FY07 are budgeted at just under $581,000. Total expenditures would be about $616,000, and there would be the use of fund balance of about $35,000. In terms of revenues, the council recently authorized the use of some of the city's FY07 program open space funds for the proposed gym project, and the funds that the council approved by resolution to be dedicated for the proposed gym total just under $436,000. Program open space funds do require a 25% match from the governmental jurisdiction, and I would propose that that match be made through an operating transfer from the general fund in the amount of about $145,000. The council is aware that we were recently successful in obtaining state bond bill funds. At this juncture, I have not included those bond bill funds in my proposed budget, pending further direction regarding the proposed gym. Both the program open space funds as well as the state bond bill funds are basically on a reimbursement basis. So until that commitment to make certain expenditures is made, I'm not sure what what we would be turning into the state for reimbursement. If this process moves quicker than I am anticipating, obviously the budget could be amended and the state bond bill funds could be reflected in the FY07 budget. Budgeting the community center fund expenditures, quite frankly, was a little bit difficult. As the council and the community, I think, are aware, there are a number of outstanding financial issues related to the Phase 1 construction in particular. My assumption in putting together my recommended budget is that both Phase 1 and Phase 2 will be completed by June 30th of 2006, and that all unresolved issues will be resolved at that time. So essentially, we'd be starting FY07 with a clean slate, if you will. Total expenditures, as I mentioned a few moments ago, would be about $616,000. For the purposes of budgeting, I did assume the full expenditure of the program open space funds for the gym. At this juncture, the only commitment the council has made is to authorize staff to issue a request for proposal for a conceptual design and a feasibility study for the gym. And as I mentioned, I anticipate that RFP will go out in the latter part of April. If for some reason, after that feasibility study is completed and the council has had an opportunity to review it, the council chooses not to go forward with the gym project. As we mentioned previously, those program open space funds could be reprogrammed for another purpose. Besides the feasibility study and any other expenditures related to the proposed gym that would occur in FY07, the only other community center fund expenditure that I am anticipating is the installation of the interior signage system for the building. This is something that has been carried on the financial report for some time. We anticipate that the signage system will be bid in the near future. It does take about 12 weeks for those signs to be manufactured, so they would actually be received and paid for in FY07. Kind of the next steps in the budget process, there will be 2 public hearings held on May 8th. One will concern the budget in general, and certainly encourage the community to come to the hearing and voice their sentiments on my recommended budget. At that same meeting, the public will also have an opportunity to comment on the constant yield tax rate. Following that public hearing, actually I think it will get underway that same evening, the council will begin to hold a series of work sessions during the month of May regarding my recommended budget, with adoption scheduled for by middle of June. For the benefit of the public, there will be, within the next day or so, a copy of my recommended budget available at the Tacoma Park Library. For public viewing, there will also be a copy on file in the city clerk's office. And by the end of this week, the budget binder that was distributed to the council this evening will be available in its entirety on the city's website by week's end. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
As the city manager mentioned, there will be a number of council work sessions in the month of May, and I would remind the council that in all likelihood we will have to be meeting on some Thursdays in order to cover the entire budget, and those would be the appropriate time for the council to discuss the items that the city manager has laid out in her budget. But I assume that if there's somebody absolutely didn't understand what you were talking about, this would be the appropriate time to ask that.
I understood what you were talking about, but I have a question about what I understood. It relates to the police department rebate. If we raised with the county the issue of the take-home cars and where that fits in terms of our rebate, because county police do get that.
My understanding from Suzanne Ludlow and Captain Corsi, who are certainly much more familiar with the rebate formula than myself, is that that is factored into the existing formula.
So if we started giving cars, would that change our formula, change our rebate?
My understanding is no. I can get a little bit more specific information about that, Councilmember Elrich, but my understanding is the county does take that into account, that if they were actually responsible for service in Tacoma Park, that they would be providing take-home cars, and that's already a component of the existing formula that's in place.
I find that stunningly hard to believe, but that's...
Yeah, I will ask Ms. Ludlow to provide some additional information on that.
Just one other similar type question. A while back, there was some discussion about discussions that were ongoing with the county about the possibilities for changing how we do police communications, and I didn't see any mention of anything that would be affected by that one way or another, and I wondered about the status of those discussions.
Yes, we did have some initial discussions about that. I can touch base with Chief Kramer, because after sitting in on some of the initial meetings, it really became a matter of sharing of data between the two police agencies. There was a lot of question because of they wanted some very specific data that, quite frankly, given the age of our record-keeping system, we were having some difficulty in pulling together some of the data that they were requesting in terms of calls.
So where do we excuse me, where do we stand with where we think that discussion might be going?
I know the last that I spoke to Chief Kramer about it, she and her staff were trying to pull together the information that the county was requesting to the extent possible, and I believe she may have had some further discussions with the county, but I think that would be a very appropriate question for the council to talk to the chief about when she appears before you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. Barb, I didn't notice during your listing of highlights, and clearly I haven't had a chance to look through the document yet, but I know that recruiting of police officers has been a difficulty for many years, and I wonder if your budget includes any increase in compensation for police officers other than the standard anticipated increases.
I think, as the council is aware, compensation for the police department is a negotiated matter with Local 400. We entered into a new agreement with the union, I believe it was last July, and those increases are basically set forth in that contract. There were two specific issues, the council may recall, that were left as openers, if you want to use that term, in the contract. One was the issue of take-home vehicles, which I touched on during my budget presentation. The other issue had to do with retiree health insurance or retiree health insurance coverage, and those discussions are ongoing between the city and the union.
I think during union negotiations, recruitment is not always a consideration that the union makes, but it is certainly something that we're interested in, and I wonder if you've given any thought to that and the need for increasing compensation.
I think, as the council is aware, we basically do wage surveys, if you will. The council recently authorized the expenditure of funds to retain a consultant. I believe, though, Mr. Hobbs can correct me if I'm wrong, the focus of that was the ASPME positions, not specifically related to the police department.
Okay, that might be something we want to discuss at a later time when doing the salary comparison for our police officers. Again, I'm concerned that those positions remain unfilled year after year.
And I think I would just, as I mentioned, I believe last week in regard to Mr. Bates's comment, and I will try to find the article that appeared recently in the Washington Post, it is a phenomenon that many police departments in this area are struggling with, as well as just departments across the country. But certainly I appreciate your concern and the sentiment, Councilmember Siemens. Thank you.
Yeah, one other thing I'd like to see is a kind of repeat of a chart on Public Works. I would like specific information on what all the things we do in our Public Works budget and all the things the county rebates us for.
Sure.
In the Public Works budget.
I'd be happy to provide that.
Any other questions, requests for information? All right.
I would just say, in closing, obviously there is quite a bit of time between now and when the council holds its first work session. As you have an opportunity to go through my recommended budget, just as you have this evening, if there's additional questions or information that the staff can provide, please don't hesitate to contact me, and we'll try to turn that around as soon as we can.
Yeah, one other comment in reaction to your pointing out the Washington Post article. And I think that's a phenomenon that we've seen nationwide, that it's hard to fill the police positions. And it makes me wonder if we don't have a problem nationwide with not compensating our police officers sufficiently. And that maybe the city of Tacoma Park should take a leadership role in paying policemen a wage that is commensurate with the risk they take for us.
I can just share, I guess, Councilmember Siemens, the benefit of my professional experience, obviously coming from a different part of the country, and I would say finding qualified police candidates has become more of a challenge going back, in my career, probably as far back as 7 to 10 years. A lot of the officers that I spoke to who had left the jurisdictions in which I was working, in many cases chose to pursue different careers. I think one of the difficulties with law enforcement is certainly the kind of shift work that you do. It's very, very tough on families. I know many officers who have left the profession just for lifestyle reasons. And I think, truthfully, there has been, I guess, just a lot of scrutiny on law enforcement. I don't know that the profession, unfortunately, is held in as high regard as it once was many, many years ago. And certainly it's a much more violent society where some people choose not to go into law enforcement. So that's just kind of not saying that's true of everyone here.
But something that's unattractive to me at $20,000 might be more attractive to me at $40,000.
Yes, and certainly we pay officers much more than $20,000, so there's no misunderstanding.
All right, if there's no other questions, the council will take a brief recess before we move into the next portion of our meeting. got the original language that we dealt with, and then following that, some alternate language, which specifically references the holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and says that if the date conflicts with either of those holidays, then the meeting shall be scheduled for the next weekday evening. If everybody's had a chance to look at that.
I also noted that in the information provided, there was no conflict in the next 10 elections at least.
Well, no, there was a potential conflict in in 2019.
Only if sunset falls after 7:30 in October.
Yeah, well, I don't
think will happen.
Well, I don't know.
Don't we know the answer to that question? There's a Google program that'll tell us that.
Well, go ahead and look it up. But the point being that it happens about once a decade. I remember it's happened twice since I've been on the council, and that's not exactly 10 years apart. But I think they said it's about once a decade.
You've been here a long time.
But we've
I
got
have
evidence
been a
in
long
front of us
time.
that says not in the next 20 years.
Well, what's your point?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, what we have in front of us is the charter amendment with the original language that we passed and some proposed alternate language. Does someone want to move it with one of those two languages or something else? Does somebody want to do anything?
Yes. Is there anything that has to be done by the person who introduced this at first reading?
Is there anything that has to be done? No. It doesn't have to be introduced by the same person, if that's what you mean.
Are we doing the election versus runoff? Are these things together?
Yes, they are together. That's the way they were at first reading also, if you
Okay,
remember.
well, I'll introduce them since they're together.
Okay. You're introducing it. Will someone second it? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. And which version were you introducing?
The last thing we did.
Not the new language?
I thought that was the last thing we did. We said we wanted the language we put in.
No. The thing that says alternate language is new since the last time we did it. Are you introducing it?
Yes, but I thought that's what
With the new
said
language.
we wanted with the new language.
Okay. I'm looking at the clerk, and she's looking perplexed. Are you trying to say that we can't do it without amending it?
I think,
Well, let's put it this way. Let's just be sure we do this correctly. So why don't we do it with the original language? It's moved in second with the original language, and then we can, if someone would like to move the amendment, the alternate language as an amendment, then we can consider it as an amendment, and that way we know that we're doing it correctly. So if someone would like to move the alternate language, you can do the original mover if you want. Would someone like to move the alternate language as an amendment?
And the alternate language specifies the date, so that...
It specifies the holidays. It doesn't specify the dates. The
Yeah,
alternate-
I would like to move the amendment for Section 604 nominations.
Okay.
Would someone the alternate language?
Would someone like to second that amendment?
I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
Okay. All right. Would you like to have some discussion?
I'd like to have some clarity. What it is that we're moving and voting on.
Okay.
Can anyone do that for us?
Yes. If you look in your packet, the alternate language is what's listed. If you have a copy of the original language listed here, this is what was voted on at first reading. Immediately following that language, that's 6 pages long. Immediately following that is a page entitled Alternate Language for Amendment of Charter Section. At the request of, I think, more than one council member, the city attorney was asked for alternate language which would specify the occasions when the nominating caucus date would be moved. And this is that language. This is the language that the city attorney suggested. It would be as an alternate to the less specific language in the ordinance that was passed at first reading.
And the problem with the less specific language was that
There was no set date.
someone was afraid there would be tampering.
Yes.
Does that person have an opinion on what we're talking about now?
I think it was the city attorney. She's not here.
No, I think the request came from, I think Councilmember Clay, didn't it?
It's a citizen in my ward who
All
was
right.
concerned, who used to be a mayor here.
But will remain nameless.
Would you like to speak to the alternate language?
There was concern that it left an opening for manipulation of the nominating caucus date, and this would make the language very specific and hopefully not leave it open to manipulation, so that you know in advance. Obviously, what are we? We're up to 2021. You know, 15 years in advance.
2019.
2019. Sorry. 13 years in advance, exactly what kinds of holidays will trigger the changes, and then exactly what would happen if that were to be triggered.
And that's not 2019, that's 2025, 20 years from now, and there would be no change.
Well, there's some question about whether it would happen on the 19th.
No, there's no question.
Okay. Any other debate on this alternate language?
Not on the alternate language, but I have another question.
Okay. We're talking about the amendment now.
Okay, then I'll wait.
Okay. Anything else on the amendment?
Oh, I would like to clarify that my constituent in question is opposed to the entire thing.
I understand that.
That was just one of the reasons that we could actually address.
Okay. Is there any other comment or on the amendment at this point?
I would just contribute that the language seems fairly tortured about when the nominating caucus will occur. But if this is satisfactory to the council, then I'm inclined to support the alternate language.
And lawyers have 13 years to figure out what we mean. So it's not the next time it's complex.
Well,
maybe not at all.
I don't care which language we use, but I think that the principle of both clarity and the principle of not having a nominating caucus on a religious holiday and doing it in such a way that someone who is unfamiliar with our process can understand that that's what we're doing. I don't think that the way we're doing it now is optimal, which is we go ahead and have the nominating caucus on that conflicts with a religious holiday. We all assume that someone at the nominating caucus is going to stand up and, propose that it be moved. And if someone doesn't know that, or if somebody assumes that it's going to happen and it doesn't, then somebody could be left out of the nominating caucus. And so I think making it clear to everybody both what we intend to do and the fact that we intend to avoid the religious holiday is important. I don't have a strong feeling about the language. I would support the amendment if people think it's more clear, but I don't have a strong sense either way. I just think it's important that we not put people in the position where they have to choose between observing a religious holiday and participating in our nominating caucus. Terry?
Last time this was before us, I suggested that it not even be here, and I still feel the same way, that we're trying to fix something that isn't going to happen for the next 20 years, and that we're spending an awful lot of time on something that's minutia and not that important at this point in time, and we have many things in the city that are important that we should be spending our time on, and as a matter of protest, I vote against the amendment.
So I think respecting people's religious holidays is not minutia.
I respect their holidays every year for the next 20 years, and after that, I'll respect them also.
Are we discussing the, I mean, what I would say is that I agree with the mayor that we should be making sure our language in the city's ordinances is as clear as possible and helps us conduct business as well as possible. And I agree that we had a problem last election cycle that we could not resolve in time. I'm happy to support resolving it in this way, and I believe the alternate language does present the most clear way for the nominating caucus to occur and not conflict with a Jewish holiday. So I'm happy to vote in favor of this when we get to the voting part.
All right, is there any other council comment? Is there any public comment on the amendment itself? All right, seeing none. Pat, were you getting up? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I want to say about that, find which way to go.
You're right. You're right.
Okay.
And then
Forward.
at the edge of your seat, straight forward from where, no, straight up toward us.
Okay.
And then you
Little
reach
left.
out, reach out.
There you go.
There you are.
You're home again.
Yeah.
We put it in a different place so we could confuse.
Okay, my name's Pat Lovelace, Maple Avenue. And one thing I'd like to say is, I think the city should be worrying about more important things than what's going to happen in 2019 or something like that. Because for all we know, we might not even be here in 2019 with what's going on in the world today. We got a war in the Middle East. We got people going hungry. We got the rapidly rising crime rate and a rapidly deteriorating standard of living. We got more to worry about than what's going to happen 20,000 years from now. I mean, didn't Zager and Evans write a song in the year 2525? I think we got more to worry about right now with what's happening in our city, what's happening in our country. We got more to worry about. We got to put our energy and our money and our time on things of much more importance of what's going to happen in 2019 or whatever it is. I mean, by then, we may have much more technology to take it over. We don't know. I mean, we may not even have a city to live in. We've got to worry about what we got, what more important things right now. Our city, our citizens, what's going to happen now, instead of worrying about the things that are going to happen, 18, 19 years from now. I mean, we got a city to worry about. I mean, put our money and our budget toward what we have to do.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for letting me share.
Any other comments? All right.
Kirsten Daviston, 58 Walnut Ave. Just looking at the proposed amendment, it seems that it makes the language a lot clearer so that there is no confusion on the issue. And although the issue will come up maybe in 2019 and not any earlier than that, it's best to just get it out of the way now so that there's no confusion later and the same mix-up doesn't happen again.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, the vote is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. 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 Opposed?
No.
Abstain?
Okay, an abstention. I'm looking at, I think, 4 ayes, 1 no, and an abstention. Okay, so we have the alternate language, and now what's in front of us is the ordinance at second reading as amended. Is there any council comments on the ordinance?
Yes, I would love to make a comment about what is the substance of this ordinance, which is the instant runoff voting. And I'm thrilled to see that we have gotten this far. I'm very excited about the possibility of the city having instant runoff voting and making sure that we have majority candidates winning our elections, and three-way races being just as fine with everyone as two-way races. So thank you to Rob Ritchie, who is here, and all of the folks at Fair Vote for helping us get this far, and thank you to the people of Tacoma Park who came out on Election Day and let us know what you thought about it. And now here we are about to finally pass it, and I'm very pleased that the council has taken care of this important business.
Yeah, I've got kind of a procedural question, and maybe the city manager can answer it. I'm looking at the signature page for the charter amendment and wondering whether charter amendments are required to be signed by everybody on the council, whether if you were in the position of voting no on a charter amendment, whether you would have to sign it, and if you didn't sign it, whether the charter amendment would be valid.
Can you answer at least part of your question, Councilmember Williams? Charter amendments are required to be signed by the council, attesting to the fact that the charter has in fact been amended. I don't believe, the city clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that we've specifically discussed with the city attorney's office whether a council member who votes against the amendment is required to sign it, or what the impact of that failure to sign is in terms of the amendment overall.
It's a majority rule.
The questions have not come up. We do record the vote on
Right.
the resolution.
It just struck me that if one
Are
were
you
to vote
thinking
no,
about refusing to sign?
We can get an electronic facsimile of your signature.
and even if I were to vote yes, and I refuse to sign, does that have any legal ramifications?
I believe it just is a majority of the city council, so as long as a majority, I'm guessing a majority of the members of the council adopt the amendment and subsequently sign the resolution, I think we'd be in the clear, but I'd be happy to ask the city attorney if you'd like, Councilmember Williams.
Can I suggest that unless some member of the council does not wish to sign this, that we not spend the city attorney's time answering that question?
Gee, kind of sounds like the discussion on the amendment a few minutes ago.
I think it's official. This city council has spring fever.
You could write a letter to the AG and the AG's opinion.
That's right.
I guess we need these pages of paper.
Is there any other discussion
I'm
on
just,
this?
I'll just weigh in with my sense that to a certain extent, I feel like both questions in this charter amendment fall into the category of if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay. Anything else?
Bruce, you provoked me to respond.
Imagine that.
But only because I think the substance of the charter amendment, the real substance, which is the instant runoff voting, is a relevant and likely consideration. I don't think three-way races are unlikely to occur in the city in the future. I think it would be, if were that to happen, it would certainly be, I think, the right thing to do to have the runoff in place and not have a candidate elected who didn't get 50% of the vote. And since I know there have been three-way races for councils before, I think there have been three-way races for mayors before, it was only a matter of the way the votes turned out in the mayor's race that it didn't result in a less than majority candidate. But in council races, it has resulted in less than majority candidates, resulting in a candidate winning with about a third of the vote, the case I know of. So I think this is actually a good and practical thing to do.
And I guess I would just say that doesn't particularly bother me. Doesn't mean I'm going to vote against it, but I just wanted to get it out there that it doesn't particularly bother me that somebody could be elected with less than 50% of the vote.
Well, I could just contribute that when I went around talking to people during the election about this issue, I guess there were 2 points that I made. One was the point that Mark just made, which is that it's quite possible that somebody could be elected again to the council with less than a majority vote. But I think the other very good reason is that Tacoma Park has been proud in other instances to be sort of on the cutting edge of issues that we think are important, even if they don't necessarily apply to our elections or whatever on a regular basis. And I think this might be one of those instances where we can pioneer something that's a good idea. And I'm very much in support of this, and I think that in putting it in front of the electorate, as I said at the time, one of the things that I felt was important is that I would be guided by the vote. And I think the vote was pretty impressive in terms of support for this, and I intend to support it enthusiastically, and I think people do understand it. And even if it's not going to affect all of our elections, it could. And in any case, I think it's an important thing to introduce into our democratic process. Any other comments?
I'll just finish off with, because of the overwhelming support in the past election, I will be voting yes on this. It's one of those times when, left to my own devices, I might vote the other way, but not this time.
Okay. Any public comment on the charter amendment resolution at second reading? Okay, I think people spoke fairly clearly on it when they when we did the referendum. So I'm going to, since I believe that the clerk needs to get a vote of an exact vote of who voted for and against, I'm going to ask for a show of hands on this. I'm sorry.
I think we need to do a roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. We need to do a roll call. Thank you. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Porter?
Aye.
Councilmember Austin May? Aye. Councilmember Barry? Councilmember Clay?
Aye.
Councilmember Elrich?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Williams?
Aye.
Okay, the charter amendment passes at second reading. And the remaining requirements are that the fair summary has to be published once a week for 4 consecutive weeks, and it will become effective on the 50th day after passage unless a valid petition for referendum is received.
If you publish the fair summary.
Now, we will, of course, publish a fair summary. As you can see, that the city clerk is on top of this, much more so than I am.
Are we going to poll council members to see if they're going to sign it?
I think we don't need to discuss that anymore. If we have to deal with it, we'll deal with it, but it's... All right, the next item on the agenda is a resolution regarding an amendment to the adopted list of companies of U.S. nuclear, who are U.S. nuclear weapons systems contractors. Somebody want to second it?
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Are you going to explain this for us?
You want to step into this group right now?
I'll jump right in. It's an amendment to take the Sony Corporation off the nuclear-free list that was adopted by the council in 2005. We have a letter from the chairperson of the National Nuclear-Free America, and also quoted in the thing, in the paper, is an email from Jay Levy saying that the agreement the council is allowed to amend the list of nuclear contractors when NFA has updated its list and certified to the city that certain entities previously listed by them are no longer participating in nuclear weapons.
And it seems like this is sort of an odd circumstance because there's only one instance that was nuclear related, but the president of Nuclear Free America believes that's an error.
Yes, that's correct.
And they're going to have a hard time tracking for us in the future.
Yes.
Okay. The resolution has been moved and seconded. Is there any additional or any council discussion of this one?
Just a quick question of the city manager. Do you know the time frame for acquisition of the piece of equipment that this takes care of so that we know what the status is for the coming 3 council meetings?
That's the next
It's the next agenda item.
Oh.
You can,
Sorry.
it's okay.
I'm sorry.
Next agenda item. And that during the next one, please.
We'll do that. Okay. Any other additional council discussion? Any public discussion on this? This is the resolution that amends the list of companies dealing with nuclear weapon systems. All right, seeing none. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Resolution passes. The next item is a single reading ordinance regarding the purchase of equipment for remote video production.
The resolution opens the way so that we can purchase the Sony equipment that will be required to do remote broadcasting and keeping it on the web. And it was brought to you before. It's a single reading ordinance. We have money in the budget for it. It's a cost of $16,185. To answer Councilmember Williams, no, we probably won't have this in time to do the next 3 meetings. We have contracted with the county to have the van and/or borrow other equipment similar to this to enable us to tape the meeting and simultaneously put it on the internet.
So it does look like it will be broadcast live?
No, it won't be a live broadcast. It will be live on the internet.
Live on the internet.
But
okay.
it'll be a
taped cable
presentation. That's correct.
Will it be shown at its usual times?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong, we do not pay for the use of the PEG van, but we have to pay for the engineers.
For the crew that they provide, and that's premium pay since it's at nights.
Okay.
So we do well to have shorter meetings the next 3 weeks.
Well, that would be nice. I think Councilmember Siemens asked at the last meeting how many times we've used the van in the past, and I do have some numbers on that. We used the county van 7 times in 2004, 9 times in 2005, and we're scheduled 9 times plus 2, 11 times in 2006.
Thank you. Yeah, and the purpose was to do a price comparison of this to the equipment that we're trying to purchase. And do you have a feel for what it costs us when the PEG van comes out?
We have to hire 2 people at union wage. They get $75 an hour each. So that's $150.
$150 an hour
per
times
hour.
a 5-hour event or whatever.
That's correct.
So for
and in some cases, the council meeting might be 4 or 5 hours, but if we do the Folk Fest, that's considerably longer.
But not tonight.
And we can do just a couple people for like the Folk Festival? Don't they try and get sometimes simultaneous things going on?
Yeah, we use different various things, but this will enable us to do a lot more. You can do a 3-camera shoot with this.
Okay. All right. Are there any additional questions in the council discussion? Any public discussion of this purchase? It was budgeted.
Yes.
All right, seeing none. This is a single reading ordinance, so will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter?
Aye.
Councilmember Austin Lane?
Aye.
Councilmember Barry? Councilmember Clay?
Aye.
Councilmember Elrod? Aye. Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Williams?
Aye.
All right, the ordinance passes. Thank you, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
The next item, we're moving on to the discussion of the Montgomery Housing Partnership pilot.
Good evening. I'm here for Sarah Danes, who's out of the office this week. Rob Goldman and Sharon Anderson are here from Montgomery Housing Partnership to continue the discussion of their request for a payment in lieu of taxes with the City of Tacoma Park. They've had some changes that have occurred since their last meeting with you on February 6th, so they're going to elaborate a little bit on that. And after they're finished, I'd like to give you an update on the tenant opportunity to purchase law and what the tenants have communicated to our department from these 3 properties.
Okay.
Good evening. Robert Goldman, President of Montgomery Housing Partnership, and this is Sharon Anderson, Director of Real Estate and Neighborhood Development. Basically, we came to you before with 3 properties. They were property on Houston Avenue, Flower, and Erie, all owned by one owner. And it was we had a contract to purchase all 3. There was some issues surrounding the one on Houston Avenue, which needed to get worked out. So we had to take that off out of the contract in order to proceed. So we're proceeding with Erie and Flower. In addition, at the same time, we've been working with the county that is exercising their first right to purchase a property on University Boulevard and then selling it to us. So we're here to talk, basically amend our previous proposal, which would be a pilot for the property at University, Erie and Flower, we're still working on the Houston effort, and hopefully we'll come back to you on that, but really don't have anything firm or a contract on that, so we really couldn't bring it here tonight.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions you may have.
I just look forward to the upgrades in the buildings. And I think that, as we discussed before, that there's a substantial number of units that will be under nonprofit ownership in the city. And I think it's a really good model, and I think it's going to be a great benefit to the tenants. And I'm glad to see that you all stuck with us, and hopefully we'll get the Houston Avenue issue resolved shortly.
Thank you.
And I think also this is a valuable use of the city's funds. I believe when we've talked about affordable housing, we've talked about the city's contribution to the maintenance of affordable housing, and I think this is a very useful contribution that we can make to enable a nonprofit which intends to keep it as affordable housing. And it's a good way for the city to encourage that sort of thing. Did you have anything?
Okay, in terms of the tenant opportunity to purchase law, the community organizers visited with the tenants at 1001 and 1005 University Boulevard, and this was back in October and November 2005, and the tenants in this property have formed a tenants association and are working actively with Montgomery Housing Partnership. They're very excited about the prospect of the building being purchased by them, and are looking forward to the renovation and the changes. In regard to 8624 26 Flower Avenue, our community organizers have a meeting set up with the tenants this Thursday, April 13th, to discuss a letter that they received from Montgomery Housing Partnership as well as the owner in regard to their options to purchase the property. Mario has talked with a couple of the tenants there, and his feeling is that the tenants in this property are not interested in purchasing the property, and again are looking forward to Montgomery Housing Partnership purchasing the property. They are concerned about the eventual rent increases that may come from the capital improvement petition, but I think that a meeting with Montgomery Housing Partnership in the future will help resolve some of their fears about this. In regard to 719 and 21 Erie Avenue, a tenant is coming in tomorrow to register a tenant association with the City of Tacoma Park. There are 16 units in that building, so it takes 6 members to form a tenants association. And she has advised our office that she and some other tenants are interested in exercising their right to purchase the property. So a meeting has been set up with those tenants, which will take place on April 23rd. And they were given their notice of the purchase of the property on March 10th, so they have 45 days to express an interest. And so that would be April 24th would be their deadline for doing that. But our only information right now is that they are possibly interested in purchase, and we'll be meeting with them to find out if this is a group effort.
Okay. If it were just the 2 properties, would you all go forward with the 2?
Well, we would like to, yes. University would still move forward. It's not tied into this contract, so that's moving forward, and we hope to close on that shortly. The other 2 are tied into one contract, and so it would be sort of up to our ability to negotiate with the owner to take one property out and continue. We don't know what their response at this point will be, so we'll. I guess our intent is to wait to see what the residents decide to do. We've tried to get a meeting with some of the residents, talk about what we're planning to do and understand what their desires are. Maybe we can work together. Maybe we can't. And if it's determined we can't, then we'll have to talk to the owner about where it stands. There is the possibility, the owner has put sort of an onerous escrow requirement, a non-refundable escrow requirement. So shortly after the tenants have that right. So it's a real question whether the deal will, and the contractor will be able to survive that. We'll just have to talk to the owner.
Okay. And the housing office will sort of keep us apprised of the progress?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
When you rent these, if they become vacant, and units become vacant, is there a means test for the rent? Do you rent? Do people
Yes,
apply and have a certain income level?
Yes, we enter into agreements with the county as well as others, depending on what specific funding we get, and that makes specific restrictions about certain units. Typically, the units need to be affordable to folks under 60%.
60%
of median.
And all of the units at 60%, or that's a general model?
Well, I'm going to get to that. That's sort of to be quote affordable, they need to be under 60. The county oftentimes asks for a few units to be below that, even below that, and so we come up with something that works, and we're talking about a few units at maybe 40% median.
Okay.
And then because we have a policy of not wanting to displace anybody in a unit, and so oftentimes we find that when we go into a building, a certain percent are over income, over 60%, then we have a certain percent that are what we call market or unrestricted, so that we can allow folks to stay. So we're still working out the exact percentages, but I will say, as a general matter, most of them are over folks who are under 60% of median.
And how do you determine what people's incomes are and whether they qualify?
We do as part of sort of their lease, they agree to do an income certification annually. Doesn't mean that, and that's what required by the finance funders that we use. Doesn't mean that if somebody becomes over income that they're displaced. Just we need to know there's certain rules and requirements we have, so that we need to keep track of who's below the income restrictions and who's not. And then, but when someone moves in, they have to be income qualified.
But they may go over income at some point, and you don't kick them out. You just allow them to stay.
Yeah, most of the programs allow them to stay. What you have is, because we had 10% that were market, the next market unit would have to then be an affordable unit, because somebody who was affordable became market, so to speak. So we make that switch.
That's very interesting. Have you done, at this point, you've done an assessment of the income levels of the current tenants?
Yes, and at this point, they have not disclosed. We have sort of some gauge from the files, I guess, of the current owner, but we have not done a current assessment.
Okay.
And generally, we find it relatively hard to do until we own the building.
Sure, I appreciate that. I would be interested to get general feedback at the point you're able to do that, because, you know, one of the criticisms of our house rent stabilization laws has been that we are really subsidizing people who don't need to be subsidized. And I think it would be helpful feedback to get a feel for at least the buildings that you're familiar with, on what the current rental has been like there. Thank you.
Any other comments? Is the council comfortable with these changes in the original program that we talked about? Basically, it's just changes of properties, and you're giving us an update of the situation. I appreciate that very much. And I think people are still agreeable to it.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.
Sure.
Appreciate it. The next item on our agenda is a discussion of the Municipal Aggregation Committee, and Martin Gottschalk is here this evening. If you all remember Martin Gottschalk, he was the person who helped us put together the original letter that was signed last year when municipal aggregation was one of the issues that was a priority for MML. He came and helped us put together this letter. The letter was signed by, I think, 15 total municipalities, including the city of Tacoma Park. And one of the things that the letter said, and here is a copy of the letter, one of the things that the letter said was that the signing entities would agree to put together a sort of organizing committee. And with the increase in the cost of electricity, it's likely that municipal aggregation will continue to be an issue before the legislature. It may or may not get through this year, but it is very likely to come up again next year and in subsequent years. And so the entities, the municipal entities that are interested in this issue, I think are would like to be in a good position to think about what they might do if this legislation should pass. It's also the case that when this legislation came up before the committee for hearing this year, the chairman of the committee asked why some municipal entities don't just move forward and make a proposal to the Public Service Commission. There was a discussion the last year about the Public Service Commission sponsoring a pilot project. The pilot project had such onerous requirements that the municipalities decided not to go forward with it. But it would make certainly a good argument if some entity were to make a proposal to the Public Service Commission, and the Public Service Commission either went forward with it or turned it down, in which case you could then argue to the legislature that, you know, it can't be done under the current law. So I think there's a lot of reasons to sort of prepare for something like this, whether we end up going forward without the change of the law or whether we end up using it as an argument to make a change in the law. So it seems like a good time to do this. And Martin is very interested in being one of our appointees to the organizing committee. It's been raised by the staff as to who the other persons might be. It could be a staff person, it could be an elected official. I think there might be some good reasons to have an elected official on this group. Just, I believe Kensington might be interested in putting an elected official in the group, and it certainly raises the profile and also would assist this group in maintaining contact with the council. And of course, any policy issues that this group brought forward would have to be decided by the council. So I'm not volunteering. I'm a little bit overpromised at this point, but members of the council might want to think about whether somebody might be interested in doing that. So I want to see if you had anything you'd like to add, since you're the person who sort of generated the initial impetus on this.
Thank you for having me again. I think Mayor Porter summarized everything quite well. The point of the committee, forming the committee, I think would be that there would be two main things. There will be to come forward with a plan, a viable plan, that come the day that the legislation is passed, we could actually, hit the ground running with something to do. But also, I think coming up with a plan would help get the legislation passed. There was this, Derek Davis made this actually a specific request, or it was a comment to MML, where he said, well, why, if you really want this so badly, why haven't you come forward with anything? And that's, I think it's an obvious answer, which is that it's a hard thing to do. Why would anyone waste their time coming forward with something if there's nothing, if the law might not be there? But with those two phases to the plan, I think it's a good idea to have this committee, and I think there's a lot of interest from what I can tell. If you have any specific questions, I'd like to answer them, but what I would say is I think the letter, which is the first 2 pages of what I've given to you, would be if and when the committee comes together, would be sort of a constitutional document that would specify what we're trying to do. And basically, we want the last couple of paragraphs, I think, hit the high points where we want to get the best price for our citizens, and we'd want to look into the environmental aspects of the electricity we buy as well. So I think those are the two main things that I'd be interested in. And I hope we get moving on this. It's like I heard the discussion last week on rent stabilization and on low-income housing, and I can tell you that I suspect you all are familiar with the magnitude of the cost increases that they're proposing, and they're rather large, and they're not at all unanticipated. We've known this is going to happen for a couple of years now, and my feeling is I'm sorry we waited so long to move. But it's going to hit low-income people very hard, and I hope we're able to do something about that. We will be striving to, of course, to do something for everybody. That's what that will be. But the low-income people are hit. This is a very regressive expense. We have food, water, and air. And in modern society, I would argue that electricity is entering into that realm. I'd like to answer some questions. I can tell you a little bit about my background and the work I put into this if anyone's interested, but that might be rehashing old ground that we spoke about last year. So,
just to put it in context for the council, if we do decide to go forward with appointments, Martin would very much like to be one of the appointees, so you might consider this in part sort of an interview with him for that position.
Certainly.
I think Terry's hand was up first, and then Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Gutstock. I appreciate your coming here tonight, but more importantly, I appreciate your continued long-time leadership in this particular issue, and especially I think your foresight and your vision and the need for this is impressive, because you've been pushing for this for much longer than the need has been obvious. And I appreciate that, and I think it would be helpful if you just give us a little background information on what you have done with this, when you got started on it, and kind of some of the more important steps that you've taken, because I'm familiar with the work you've done, and certainly you are Takoma Park's, I think, leader in this arena, and certainly should be appointed to the committee. But I would like you to give a little background information to my colleagues.
Okay. Well, I first came to this when I found out about there was a committee that was going to look into municipalizing the utilities for the city. And I came to that group rather late, a few years ago, and what they were going to do kind of already run its course and largely had been turned down by the Public Service Commission. The impetus of that group was the reduction of greenhouse gases, by and large. And it was not a clear link to me how it was obvious how if you municipalize the electricity, you would acquire a lot of wires and services to provide that type of thing, but the link to the greenhouse gases was not that direct, although not completely obscure. But anyway, during that process, I kind of found out about the notion of municipal aggregation. The areas around the country, the two areas where it's been tried, and the types of things they were able to do. So my interest is there is the consumer aspect, but I'm also representing the environmental aspect of it. My background, I have a finance background. I'm actually a professional biotechnology professional, but I have finance and small business involvement and intellectual property, and I've also during a stint in graduate school studied alternative energy at that. So I started to think about this, and one of the things that became clear to me was that alternative energy, particularly wind, but other types of things could be integrated into a scenario like this if it were allowed to be purchased in large amounts, by an aggregated group of municipalities at a cheap price. Wind is, the American Wind Energy Association touts wind as being at or below regular brown power, but it has to be sold off these little bits with green tags, which you all have purchased, but that comes at a premium because of the marketing associated with the green tags. And so I think that can be avoided, and we can do a lot for the environment that way if we actually pulled it off and, say, bought several wind farms worth of energy. That would be unprecedented, and it would lead to copying around the country. And so I think that would be a very big deal for the alternative energy model. In addition to the fact that it's cheaper, than and all the more, and it's going to be and next year it's going to be even cheaper. And the thing about wind is that what you pay for is the installation. You pay for the windmills, and you pay for it one time, and you amortize it over about 20 years. So you don't have this fuel price going up and down. The wind's going to remain fairly stable in cost. And so it's a fixed cost, and you know how much you're going to pay. So that's going to be the type of thing I'm going to be pushing. I'm going to be representing the environmental aspect quite a bit in this measure. And trust me, there are going to be a lot of people representing the consumer aspect of it, and I think the mayor can attest to the fact that when discussions come up in the legislature, that's primarily, if exclusively, the type of discussions that come up, the price of things.
So what I hear you saying is that the kind of the buying power of a large block of residents is what's going to help to drive the price down at the same time that the petroleum-generated electricity is skyrocketing.
Right. That's the idea is that in aggregation, a large enough number of customers, can come together and you gain buying power. You also gain purchasing knowledge, because the main thing about the big issue with in the legislature right now is this feature called opt-out aggregation. Okay.
I think the big issue in the legislature right now is Pepco and the lobbying and funding they do.
Well, that's a fair point as well.
Let me just wrap up my question by saying that I certainly support Mr. Gottschalk in being our representative, or one of our representatives on the committee. Although I think it might be some advantage in having an elected official on the committee, I think kind of the time limitations that we all face, it might not be the best solution, and it might be better to have someone more interested in the electrical aggregation or the environment that join Mr. Gottschalk on the committee and representing Tacoma Park.
Well, we have the option. There's no limitation on the number of people that we could appoint. We could, put as many people on it as we wanted to.
Yeah, I'm real happy with the work you've been doing, and I'd be thrilled to support you on this committee. But I think that it would be a mistake in general to separate environmental from consumer issues, and we shouldn't be driven into that kind of bargain.
Well put.
And that's, we'd be cursed either way if we were forced to make a choice like that.
Yes,
and I agree with your point about actually becoming owners of the actual production, because that's sort of the key. I mean, people talk about the sky-high oil prices, but you can be reasonably sure that both coal and natural gas will follow suit, because if oil becomes more expensive and people begin to shift, particularly plants that have any ability at all to shift what they burn to another source of fuel, then that source will become more scarce, and the price of that's going to be driven up. And they'll certainly look at the market and say, for the BTUs that you're paying for oil, you could be paying the same dollars per BTU for my coal not my personal poll, but the rhetorical personal poll. And I think that we're going to wind up in a spiral where there are no cheap energy sources except for the alternatives like wind, and maybe wind and solar finally get to come into their own amidst all this craziness. But I like your approach. I really appreciate the work you did. I think what it shows is, the people in Annapolis who've been acting like they're ever so surprised by what happened this year. I mean, I remind this council that we had a discussion about this in the very beginning when we heard they were going to do this, and we began pushing for municipal aggregation early on because we were not surprised by where deregulation got us, and there were plenty of people, both in Annapolis and outside of Annapolis, who said this is going to lead to a train wreck. And now you get to watch all these people in Annapolis dancing around and say, I never saw the train wreck coming. And it's kind of like other things that we seem to be dealing with. It's plenty of evidence of what's going to happen. We just pretend that we're going to ignore it. So I appreciate the fact that you stuck with it. You've been involved so long. I think you do a good job on the committee.
One of the things was one of the points that PEPCO made, and they testified at this hearing, and they said, well, if you do aggregation and you make the price lower for these large groups, then the price is going to go up for everyone else. And one of the other witnesses pointed out that not necessarily if there's competition, because there's no real competition now, because basically PEPCO and PG&E have all the business, and it's too expensive for any other provider to get in. But if one of the providers got in through bidding on one of these aggregated groups, then they would actually create more competition in the market, would provide an entree for competitive energy suppliers. So it could actually drive prices down for everyone, of course, to the expense, at PEPCO's expense, and so that's obviously why they don't bring it up. But it was an interesting issue, and I thought the hearing itself was quite interesting. Any other questions, comments? I've been sort of waiting until after we had this discussion, but I'm going to go ahead and send out this letter asking other municipalities to go ahead and make their appointments. Larry Giamo and I, we're both listed on the letter because we've had this conversation, and both of us feel that this is a good time to move forward with this. And I think it would be incumbent upon us to make our appointments in the next month also, and so I'll try and get that on the agenda. And anyone who's interested in doing that, anyone in the council is interested in doing that, I'm also going to ask the city manager if she will think if there's other people, either staff or other individuals that she might recommend that we do that if she would like. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate your waiting. We were running a little bit late, but I appreciate your participation. Thank you. If there's nothing else, we're adjourned.
Officials have the mind to focus on peace. Got to keep your mind well focused. Or you surely end up like a grain of dust. Come on, moving on up, moving on up. Keep on getting up, keep on getting up. Got to live it up, got to live it up. Never give it up, never give it up. Moving on up, moving on up. Keep on getting up, keep on getting up. Got to live it up, got to live it up. Never give it up, never give it up. Moving on up, moving on up. Keep on getting up, keep on getting up. Got to leave it up, got to leave it up. Never give it up, never give it up. Never give it up, never give it up. Never give it up, never give it up. Yeah.